Continue our study of Romans. We've been at this a long time, as most of you know. COVID is partly responsible for that. The pace of this class is mostly responsible for that. We just plod through it rather than making broad sweeps. And so we're going to continue on with our study of Romans this morning. We're in chapter 15 and beginning in verse 26. Looked at this a little bit last week and want to continue on with one specific thing that we didn't get to talk about last week because we ran out of time. Let's read it together again, then we'll jump in. For it pleased those from Macedonia and Achaia to make a certain contribution for the poor among the saints who are in Jerusalem. It pleased them indeed, and they are their debtors. For if the Gentiles, and I say, for they, Gentiles, are their Jews' debtors. For if the Gentiles have been partakers of their spiritual things, their duty is also to minister to them in material things. Therefore, when I perform this and have sealed them this fruit, I shall go by way of you to Spain. But I know that when I come to you, I shall come in the fullness of the blessing of the gospel of Christ. And we were looking at that phrase, for if the Gentiles have been partakers of their spiritual things, their duty is to minister to them in material things. Now, as we think about that, what does it mean to be partakers of their spiritual things? How do the Gentiles partake in their spiritual things?
They were precious like them.
Okay, they were precious like them. Dave?
I'm guessing it's a reference to the Old Testament lead up to.
Okay. All right. Dave suggests it's a suggestion back to the Old Testament lead up to that. To whom did the Gospels go first? The Gospel go first. To the Jews. And from there it radiated out until, of course, Peter and Cornelius was where that kind of started. Paul was selected to be the apostle to the Gentiles. And so the Gentiles received the spiritual blessings because of and through the Jews. And that was the way it was always intended to be. The Old Testament talks about that as far back as Deuteronomy. And so we understand that. So the Gentiles are partakers of their spiritual things, and therefore their duty is to minister to them in material things. Why do you think he brings that? Why do you think he takes it from the spiritual to the material? Jim?
We're blessed by what we do.
Okay.
Through spiritual things.
Okay.
God's taking care of us. The more that we take care of others, the more He's going to take care of us.
Okay, Jim suggests that we're blessed because of our spiritual things, and the more we do physically for others, we share that blessing with others. Dave?
Well, I would think that in that particular time situation, that the Jewish Christians were paying a dear price for converting from Judaism to Christianity because they were considered turncoats in the Jewish group. So they probably lost their livelihoods, lost their opportunities to work. Not to mention that the first day of the week for the Jews was a day, was a normal work day, whereas Sabbath was not.
Okay, so Dave makes a suggestion that because of their faith, they were considered more outcast by the typical, normal, secular Jewish population, if you want to use that phraseology, and therefore they were suffering the consequences of that. We know there was famine and drought that was involved in some of this, and that added to the problem. But it harkens back to me to Jesus' teaching, or to the teaching of the New Testament. Jesus said, if you give a cold cup of water in my name, what have you done? You've done it to me, haven't you? And so he took it into that understanding this is all coming from our spiritual relationship, our spiritual nature, if you will. But that doesn't mean it's just there. What does the passage say? If you see a brother or sister in need and you tell them, be warmed and filled, what have you done? Nothing, right? You've done nothing to help that person. And there's a challenge in that. And so I guess the point I'm headed toward in all of this about the Gentiles and Jews, again, we understand that the nature of their relationship at times was like this because of the kind of the divide between the two groups of people. Jews didn't like Gentiles, Gentiles didn't like Jews, and it was obvious and apparent. Now they're mixed and mingled in churches, and that's an issue that people are having a hard time getting over on both sides. And Paul spent quite a bit of time in his letter here to them talking about that issue. And it's not just here, it's in Galatians, it's in other places of the New Testament because it was such an issue. And so he's talking about them. This isn't just spiritual, this is physical. And you, in a sense, cannot separate the two. You can't sit in church on Sunday morning and sing and worship with your Gentile or your Jewish brethren and then not care a thing about them the rest of the week. That seems to me what he's saying. And would you agree with that, or am I off base? Yes.
Even in the Gospels, Jesus spent most of his time ministering to people's physical needs.
Right.
While also ministering to their spiritual needs.
Yeah. The point made that Jesus spent a whole lot of time dealing with people's physical needs, not just their spiritual needs, while he was here. And again, I don't know how, and I don't think you do either, how you separate the spiritual and the physical per se. I mean, intellectually we can do that. We know there's a spiritual side, we know there's a physical side, but actually living that way, with those being two separate parts of our lives, I think that might be hard to do. Les, you had a comment.
Well, I think you're right that this passage specifically addresses that type of relationship we should have with one another. But I think we need to extend that, even though this passage doesn't address it. We need to have a special feeling for one another. But those outside the body of Christ, we need to be concerned about too.
Sure.
And demonstrate the kind of love and compassion that Jesus had to those ourselves.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's sort of hypocritical of us.
Yeah.
Just limit our goodness and to our fellow members.
Yeah. Les suggests that we should extend that out beyond just the church relationship to those outside the church, because we have an obligation to them as well. You know, let's think about Jesus' ministry. How many church members did he minister to? Not a single one. There was no church yet. He ministered to those who were in need, and it didn't matter whether they were rich or poor or what their circumstances were. In fact, he ministered to those people largely who were the outcasts of society. And Jesus teaches us that. What attracted people to the church when it was established in Acts chapter 2? They were together daily. They sold their goods, gave to anyone who had need. And the church grew by leaps and bounds as a result of that, because of their generosity. And so the lesson here is you can't separate the spiritual connection from the physical connection. There's just no way to do that, at least not be biblical about it. We need to care about each other and our physical circumstances. John?
Faith and works.
Yeah, exactly. Faith without works is what? Dead. Paul said, "I'll show me your faith without your works. I'll show you my faith," what? By my works. And so it's such an important thing we have to keep in mind. And I think we all understand this. I'm preaching to the choir here, if you want to use that expression. We know that. We understand that. But every once in a while, we might need to be reminded of that. And I don't know, right at this time of the year, doesn't it seem to be easier to think about generosity? Because kind of the whole world's thinking about generosity, Thanksgiving, Christmas, all that kind of stuff. But along about February the 15th or the 23rd, or it's only 28 days in February this year, and so the 28th of February, all that's kind of gone away, and it becomes a little easier to not think about that because it's not so much in the forefront of our thoughts and minds. Les?
You asked the question, how do you combine those two? It's sort of like asking which came first, the chicken or the egg.
Yeah.
Anyone who has administered help to others in need, if they don't see a spiritual reward from that, something that is not clicking right.
Yeah.
Because we're always, I know it takes effort to go visit in the hospital, it takes effort to do a lot of things, but when we do it, we see blessings from it.
Yeah. Les makes the point that it's hard to separate those two because we go chicken and egg, which spiritual is physical, physical, spiritual, which, and it's so tied up, such a symbiotic relationship between the two that we can't really separate them. And he makes mention that it's sometimes hard to go to the hospital. But there's a spiritual blessing to that. And I've used this illustration before and use it again. I know several of you, if I asked you, has that happened to you, you'd raise your hand. But have you ever been knowing that you needed to go visit somebody in the hospital, visit a nursing home, visit somebody at home, do something like that you just know, Kevin, you really need to do that. And I'm thinking, busy, tired, honestly, I just don't want to do it. But then you go ahead and do it anyway, and you walk away from that visit. Let's say it's somebody in the hospital, and you go in and you visit them in the hospital. And I can say without a doubt, without a single exception, I come away from that encounter feeling better than I did when I went in. And part of that is because I know, Kevin, you sucked it up and did what you were supposed to do. But generally, it's more because you enjoyed the encounter with the individual and knew that there was, again, that spiritual connection there, along with your physical presence. And that's something we need to keep in mind, because that's a powerful motivator. On a selfish, I want to feel better, so I'm going to go out and be around others. And that's probably not the right way to look at it. But at the same time, as Les said, there's spiritual blessings we get from doing those kind of things when we'll step out and do them. Dave?
Yeah, you and radio, y'all have the special privilege of being able to get in the hospital to people. What's the story now with COVID? Can the general population go and visit the hospital anymore?
Sandy's got the last experience with the hospital, so what's the protocol now? One person per day. So,
no matter how many people are.
Yeah, I know when I was in over a year.
You got a schedule.
Yeah. If Sandy goes, nobody else can go that whole day.
And there's the other factor that if the patient's COVID test does not come back negative at Memorial North, not Central, but North, you can't.
Okay.
I couldn't even go.
Yeah. So again, talking about this in the hospital right now, we're in unique circumstances with COVID, and I don't think that God is going to, Dave, you didn't go to the hospital to see the other Dave because you couldn't. I mean, so that's an issue. But it's, under normal circumstances, are we ever going to get back to normal? I'm beginning to wonder. Anyway, I can get political, but I won't. I lost my train of thought after I said that.
You were talking about how you feel better after you go.
Yeah, you feel better after you do that. And again, it doesn't have to be a personal visit. It could be a phone call. It can be a card. It can be, I get cards periodically of thanks for this, that, and the other. And I appreciate those. You know why? Because it's taken somebody, they've either So many of you make your own cards, and that takes time. And then you've got to write that nice little note in there. Then you've got to put it in an envelope, and you've got to go to the post office or somewhere and get stamps, and you've got to mail it. That's a little bit of an effort, isn't it? That's easier than a phone. That's harder than a phone call. You pick up the phone, talk for 5 minutes, and be done. So I appreciate those. So it's not just limited to certain list of approved things that we do for each other. It can be anything. And that should be what our mindset is. What can I do? It doesn't have to be a card, a phone call, a visit. It can be anything that I do to be of kindness and assistance to my brother or sister. Amy.
Every congregation has a core group of cards.
Yep.
It's me. If we all step up our game, and this is me because I'm lazy,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm too tired, I'm busy, all these excuses, and everyone steps up and they're getting outside that core group. Man, what encouragement we could all do.
Sure, absolutely. Amy makes the point that if those of us who aren't in that core group who do those things would step up and do it, and she makes the point that we're all getting tired, and she even used the term lazy. I don't appreciate you calling me lazy, but I am. That's beside the point. If we could all step up our game, how much more benefit would there be to that? Again, Macedonia and Achaia made certain contributions for the poor among the saints. And the conversation about that was that this wasn't the intelligentsia, elite aristocracy in Macedonia and Achaia that were making these contributions. It wasn't the millionaires, it wasn't the billionaires. It was the average Joe who was working for a living, who wanted to do something to help and gave what he or she could. And that's all of us. And not all of us can give as much as all others can. That's fine. God knows. God's not looking at the amount of the gift. God's looking at the intent of the heart. And that's what we've got to remember. Where did I see a hand? Vicki.
I think one point to think about is not a checklist of we go to hospital,
Yeah.
we do that. But we look for the opportunity when there's a need, we step up and we do
Sure.
something. And an example of that was a few years when we had the Black Forest Fire.
Yeah.
This congregation stepped up. We had volunteers who went out to the distribution center where people were coming in and getting tools and cleaning supplies, and people contributed money, people contributed gift cards that we handed out to people. One Saturday we made lunches and we carried it out to people sifting through the ashes of their homes. That was so rewarding. That was an opportunity for us to show the love of Jesus. And even though we didn't have flocks of people coming to worship here because of that, we still planted a seed and gave them a good feeling because they were very appreciative. So you have to look for the opportunity.
Sure. Yeah, exactly. Vicki points out that during the Black Forest Fire, where we took part in the relief effort that was there and did a lot of things for that, and that was good and that was great. And while we didn't see a flock of people coming to church because of that, we planted the seed. They may not have known anything about the churches of Christ prior to that, but they do now. And, who knows what that seed will produce in the future. Paul said, I planted, Apollos watered, but what's the last part of that? God gave the increase. And so we're seed planters, and that's our job. As we therefore have opportunity, let us do good to all. Flo.
Well, unless our lives are spiritual, we're not going to be in tune with God. We're not going to be giving, forgiving, loving, or compassion. But on the other hand, when we serve in God's kingdom, serve each other, serve others, we shouldn't be doing it because we're guilt. We'll do it if we're spiritual. We'll do it because we want to.
Yeah.
That's not because we have to. We don't have to be here.
Yeah.
We shouldn't come to church because I feel guilty. I think we do it if we love God enough. We're going to do those things without thinking about whether did I do enough, didn't do enough. Should I feel guilty if I didn't? I think that we need to come to the picture.
Yeah. Flo makes the point, and it's a good point, that if we're spiritual, if we're in tune with God, we are going to want to do those things. We're going to naturally be willing to do those things, rather than doing it out of a sense of guilt. I'm not saying that doing something out of a sense of guilt sometimes can be good, but that's shouldn't be our driving force behind why we're doing this. We should be doing it because I have been so blessed. Gentiles in this have been so blessed with the gospel. Their response was, let's help our Jewish brethren because of the blessings that we have. And that should be our mindset about that. And that's what I think Paul was trying to say here. Amy?
So, based on what Paul was saying, how do we switch if one of us is feeling guilty and we're not coming from a sound spiritual place? How do we get from A to Z?
Okay.
To get from feeling guilty of doing stuff and we're trying to make all those check boxes and that, am I doing enough? How do we get that from the
Okay. Amy asked the question. It's a good question. How do you get to the point? If you're in that point where you're feeling guilty, you're doing it because it's a checklist thing, stuff I got to do. How do you get from there to what Flo was talking about? I'm doing it because I'm spiritual, because I feel the need to do that, and because I want to do that.
Well, the more you do something, the easier it is.
Okay.
If you're doing it for the right reason. And sometimes if you have some guilt, you shouldn't feel bad about that.
Okay.
But doing it over and over will become more natural.
Okay. So Marcia suggests practice makes perfect. It's just if you're doing it, you're going to get better at it. You're going to feel better about it less.
Well, let's not forget the purpose for which God designed guilt and conscience. He put that in us to spur us on to do the right thing, to remind us to do better. So as Marcia mentioned, as we do these things, it should begin to well over into, I'm not going to do it because I have to, but because I want to, and it's beneficial to both me and the other individuals.
Sure, absolutely. So Les makes the point that if we do it, the goodness of that's going to spill over into the guilt area where we were kind of coming along with that. All right, Dave, back here, over here.
Well, a few weeks ago, we talked about sacrifices, that God sees us as an acceptable sacrifice. You know, our service to God is going to be a trade-off. We've got to decide, am I going to do a Christian thing, or am I going to do a Christian service, a spiritual service, or am I going to do something I want to do? So I don't know that it ever becomes an intuitive thing for any of us to say that, you know, I'm just going to wake up in the morning and intuitively this is what I'm going to do for the Lord. I think we have to resolve, we have to decide what we're going to do. That's our spiritual sacrifice.
Okay.
I don't see us as ever evolving to the point where we don't have to consciously make those decisions and make that sacrifice.
All right, Dave makes the point that he doesn't think we ever evolved to the point where it just comes naturally to us, that we have to resolve, we have to think about it, we have to make decisions about it, we have to pray about it in order to do that. And maybe we're mistaking that process for guilt instead of just the process of, okay, what am I going to do and how am I going to do it and all of that. Steve?
I want to take a flip side of the coin
Okay.
and say that we also need to be prepared to be recipients of things.
Yeah.
A lot of times, even in my personal life, pride's gotten away, and I'm like, no, we're good, this and that. But the reality is, when we consider the church across the board, we all have different needs as well. And allowing somebody to do something for us, especially spiritual and material needs, is also, we've got to recognize that as part of the church.
Yeah, Steve makes the point that the other side of the coin is being willing to accept that help and that aid. But doesn't it say it's better to give than to receive? Isn't that scripture? So how do you make that with what he's saying, which is absolutely correct? Scripture also says pride goes before a fall and a haughty spirit before destruction, doesn't it? So there's that part of it. Marie.
When you get older, there's things I did not know I'm not able to do.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to find other ways I could serve God.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I'm very alert and watch people in our congregation. Some struggle with not even being there every time. And so I'll start praying for that person and trying to encourage you. And me, a young girl come up to me a few months ago and said, you make me inspired. And I said, how? She says, you're here every time. And I have to walk with the walker now. So it's real hard. And sometimes I think, oh Lord, can I make another day?
Yeah.
But I pray more for people.
Yeah.
And I can do that, and I'll give an encouraging word when I can.
Yeah. Yeah, we do what we can, can't we? Because sometimes we just simply cannot do things. And Loree talking about age-wise, you just can't do these things, but there are things you can
I had to
do.
get over that guilt.
Yeah.
Because I thought, man, I just be busy constantly, and I felt so guilty, and then I started praying about it, and of course I study more because I'm retired now, so I've done deeper studying, and I have found out so much in the last 2 years by studying on my own that just thrills you because you're starting to put the puzzle together how it fits.
Yeah.
Because one of the things I learned was Melchizedek. They used to bring it up. I never could understand it. Never connected. I finally got all that connected together with the scriptures, and it thrills you.
Sure, absolutely. It gets you. There's other blessings that come with that. Bill, you got a comment?
As we move from awareness to motivation to solution, one thing that works for me is to make a list.
Okay.
And write on it. Call somebody, write somebody, do this, and tape it to the bathroom mirror. So every morning, I've got to look at it and I can check off what I've got done, and it's a continual reminder.
Okay.
I don't put mine on the bathroom mirror, but I put it right there by the television remote.
Yeah, okay.
And it gives me a choice, Kevin. Pick up the remote or do something on the list.
Sure. Yeah. So Bill makes a good point that checklists aren't always bad if they're reminders of things we need to do, and gives us a visual reminder. I'm a note writer too. If I don't write it down, it doesn't get done. It's because it's gone. And so I write stuff down, not because it's a checklist and okay, if I check all these 6 things off my list today, I'm going to go to heaven. That has nothing to do with it. But these are things I need to get done, and I'm going to remind myself I've got to get these done and try to do my best that day. And that's a good process to get you from that point of I need to do something to actually getting something done. Flo?
You know, God gave us abilities and talents, and He wants to use them. He gave us resources, He wants us to use them. But also, I don't think that God, that's my personal opinion, that we should do everything and feel guilty because you're not involved in everything that's supposed to be done. We do, like she was saying, we do what we can, we do what we're able to do, and secondly, we're to honor God, not honor ourselves.
Right.
I don't want somebody to say, well, look how much I've done in the church. And, you know, sometimes we lose sight of that perspective. It begins to cloud our spirituality and our love for God and our service to God.
Flo makes the comment that we need to realize we all have different gifts, we all have different abilities, and we probably shouldn't be involved in everything because we can't be involved in everything. We can't do everything. But we can do what we can do, and we shouldn't feel guilty for those things that I can't do. And that's a good point. Now, I'll take the opposite side of that coin. Don't use that as an excuse. Say, well, I'm just not as talented, as good as everybody else, so I'm not going to do anything. Now, I know it's completely opposite of what Flo was saying. We can't use that as an excuse, but we have to understand that, you know, He gave some to be apostles, some to be prophets, some to be, and all those gifts, spiritual gifts that He gave, we all have a different role, eye, hand, feet, nose, ears, whatever the case may be in the church. And we need to do what we can do. Whatever your hand finds to do it with all your might. Not whatever Flo's hand finds to do, you do his thing with all your might. It's whatever you find to do. John?
2 things. I think it was John, right, that worked really hard at not going to Nineveh and doing what he should have done. He didn't feel like doing that either. I think we should be careful about beating ourselves up for not feeling like doing the things we should do. And the other thing is when we do work, let's say for somebody else, there's some people that you don't get along well with, they're kind of great on, but you should do the work as though you're doing the work for the Lord, not doing it for them. I can really keep you away from doing things that you should do. I mean,
Yeah, John makes a point. We're doing this for the Lord. It's kind of what Flo echoed in his comment just a few minutes ago. Not doing it for me, and not so much doing it for you, but we're doing this for the glory of God, because He's the one who gave me the ability to do this. He's the one who gave the wherewithal to do this, and I've got to keep that in mind, that it's not about me. And if I'm doing it just to get my name in the church bulletin, then that's probably not a good motivation. But if I'm doing it because I know it's my duty, because there's a spiritual, physical duty that Paul talks about here. And we have that duty. And we should do that duty graciously and lovingly and happily, because we know that's what Jesus would want of us. Jim?
We've always been kind of taught to help others first.
Mm-hmm.
Put others first and ourselves last.
Yeah.
I remember my mom pounding that at me when I was little.
Yeah. Yeah. We have the song we sing with the little kids. What is it? J-O-Y, J-O-Y, this is what it means. Jesus first, yourself last, and others in between. And that's a pretty good idea. A simple way to remember that. To realize that Jesus comes first, God comes first, others, and then ourselves. And sometimes that's hard, because life is so full of things and so busy and so stressful. And it's hard sometimes to get out of my little bubble and realize there's a whole big world out there that I can be involved in if I'll get out of that bubble. Janelle?
We were talking about everybody having something. And it's okay if you have the same thing as someone else. It just means that two of you can do it and get them done. Each two have the same gift.
Sure, yeah. Two people have the same gift. I'll use this illustration. I've heard several of you ladies who do the card making, and send out these beautiful ornate cards, and I have trouble just buying one at Walmart that's made by Hallmark, but you go through the effort of making it. And I've heard you talking to each other about that. It sounds like Greek to me. No, it's not Greek. Hebrew to me. When you're talking about these things, blah, 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 blah. But 2 people, 3 people, 4 people sharing in this gift, this artistic ability, can make a bigger difference than just one person doing it. And that's an important thing. People of similar talents. Many of you in here are talented in construction. May not be your career field, but you can build things. You can fix things. You're handy people, and you can do that. There's others in this room that wouldn't know the right end of a wrench, and that's okay. And there's some who have other abilities and other things. It's a matter of, let's focus on what I can do, when I can do it, and how I can do it. And let's not worry about what anybody else is doing, because that's between them and their God. And let's do what we can do. And these people from Macedonia and Achaia, I think it's safe to say most of them had never been to Jerusalem, had never met a single saint from the church in Jerusalem. And yet, they knew, because of the spiritual bond, these are my brothers and sisters in Christ. We support Secondly in Nigeria. How many of you have been to Nigeria? Flo's been to Nigeria. How many of you met Secondly? Grady has. A couple have met Secondly. We don't know these people, but we help them. Why? Because they're brothers and sisters in Christ. Because of this very thing we're talking about here. There is a bond there because of that spirituality that extends into the physical. And that's, I think, a very important thing for us to understand. This is why we don't get very far in class. We've talked about really half of one verse of this morning. But let's move on for real quick. Therefore, when I have performed this and have sealed to them this fruit, I shall go by way of you to Spain. So he said, I'm bringing you this, I'm taking this gift, I'm going to seal to them this fruit. What do you think he means by that idea of seal to them this fruit? Let me put it this way, what I think it means. I'm going to get a receipt from the Church of Jerusalem, and I'm going to give you that receipt back so you know that I've done what I've got done to do. That is sealing is approving and authorizing and all of that. It's a legal kind of term. But I'm sealing to them this Isn't it interesting that he uses the term fruit? I'm sure that's deliberate in his wording there. I'm not just selling to them these dollars or these chickens or these eggs or whatever it was that he was taking. We don't know what the gift actually was, but it's a fruit. It's a fruit of our labors that I'm sharing with others, and it's fruit that they're picking off the tree of the generosity of others that is going to sustain them in their life. So I think it's kind of a poetic way for him to say this idea. And then I shall go, we talked about this last week, I shall go by way of you to Spain. That was his plan, that was his hope, that was his dream. But I know that when I come to you, I shall come to you in the fullness and the blessings of the gospel of Christ. And what an amazing thing to say. He knew enough about the church that when I come to you, and I don't know what all this entails, but in the fullness of the blessing of the gospel of Christ. And the only thing I can think of that he means by that is, I'm coming to you who are saved as one who is saved, and it don't get any better than that. And we're going to enjoy each other's time, again, in Paul's estimation of what his plans were at the moment. We're going to enjoy that time together, and then I'm going to go on to Spain, and we're going to do the same thing over there. All right, thoughts, comments, questions? Amy?
Thank goodness for Dollar Tree. Cards are cheap.
Yeah, Dollar Tree. Cards are cheap, but they're going up to $1.25. Have you seen that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Still cheaper than Walmart.
Ruining the whole balance of the universe. All right, we're about out of time, so we'll quit right there and pick up, Lord willing, in verse 30 not next Sunday morning, the following Sunday morning, because Brother Rodney Ellis will be with us next week. Thank you.